Alrighty. So where last we left off, we were talking about the three main indigenous empires of Latin America. Now, suffice it to say, there was way more going on than just that. There were many empires, but these are the major ones, the ones we hear about all the time. I think we'll have today. I'm having a weird thing with my eyes today. I don't know why, but it's like the contrast is really throwing me. Hey, guys. And so, the first group that Columbus actually encountered was called the Taino, which was indigenous peoples of one of the islands of the Caribbean. From there, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and even groups like England and France came en masse to conquer this area of the world. And these cultures they encountered were not small empires. They were multiple hundreds of thousands, if not into the millions of population. But a few guys in a boat are going to be able to completely overturn their entire empire, enslave their population, and in some cases depopulate them. Do you guys understand what the word depopulate means?
No more people?
Pretty much, yeah. Now consider what this means in practicality. You successfully slaughtered a group of people so that they no longer exist. Kill every man, woman, and child. How is it possible then for a couple hundred dudes in a boat to do that to an empire of hundreds of thousands? And the answer, as would be unsurprising, has multiple parts to it that we're going to get into. But first, understand what the effect this has on them. These empires are fairly advanced. They actually had really precise engineering projects. There are many pyramids throughout South America and Central America. And, well, they're really more central in Mexico, not so much South America that I've ever heard of. But all these pyramids were aligned with astrological bodies, stars and constellations, things like that. And they were very well put together. They also had one of the most accurate calendars we've ever encountered. In fact, their calendar is pretty much the basis for ours. Now, we didn't base our calendar off of theirs. That's kind of a poor correlation. It just happens that ours correlated with theirs, and theirs was a little bit more precise. Furthermore, they had vast trade networks, and they were able to build things that were really advanced for a quote-unquote Stone Age civilization. So I think we sometimes hear the word Stone Age and immediately think of cavemen, dudes with clubs bashing people over the head and things like that. And that's not at all the case with like the Aztec or the Inca. Now they did use stone weapons, but they used a specific kind of stone called obsidian. Are you guys familiar with obsidian? It's actually a form of volcanic glass, and it can be so sharp. We're talking that you can measure it with an electron microscope, and the blades of these things are actually thinner than scalpels. And so what they would do is they would make knives and weapons out of these things. They actually had some pretty brutal weapons. One of them was called, I believe, a maquitzel, which basically was like a stone and wood chainsaw. It was a kind of halfway between a sword and a club. It's called a sword club. And legend has it that when when Hernando Cortez was fighting the Aztec, one of these guys with the Quetzal, or these Jaguar warriors, took this thing and decapitated one of Cortez's horses with this. And now horses have really thick neck bones and things like that, so that seems really kind of hard to believe. But on Spike television, I don't know the channel anymore, but it used to be, they had a series called Deadliest Warrior. And so they're sort of like one of the Mythbusters of the weapons of the ancient world sort of thing. So they would build like these human analogs with like fake bones and muscle and blood and all this sort of stuff. And they would hit them with like various weapons throughout history and see, well, how much damage can these things really do? And so they heard that theory, tested, they made like a fake horse. They got like a fake horse skeleton and put it in fake horse, things like that. And they had this dude whacking one of these weasels, and they, sure enough, cut the head off of this thing. So we're talking pretty brutal. Plus, what happens whenever you whack somebody with a weasel is all of the rocks will shatter like a hand grenade when you hit them. So it embeds shards of really like beyond razor sharp glass in the wounds. So I mean, it's not like by any means they were weak. So again, this kind of starts us having the question: how did they lose? Yeah.
When it like breaks, isn't it like that?
Sorry, what? Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Not exactly. What you're thinking of is not so much the bullets, but like cannon shot, like canister rounds, where you fire and it goes and like all these little fragments come out of it. Yeah, that's for bigger rounds. The bullets in the Civil War they were using, that was really like kind of the advanced thing, was called an A ball, which was sort of like what we think of as like a modern bullet. It allowed better accuracy and penetration power. That being said, I'm going to go off on a tangent if I can keep going down that rabbit hole. But anyway, this is a map, or not a map, excuse me, a drawing of the capital city of Tenochtitlan. This is the capital of the Aztec. Now, this is a floating city. This is on a lake, Lake Texcoco, which if you were to look on a map today, you would not find, because it's gone. When Cortez and his men took the capital city, they burned it to the ground on a lake. Think about that for a second. Then they smashed all the buildings. Then they dammed off the feeding rivers that fed the lake so that it dried out, and they built a city on the ashes of the old city. This city is Mexico City, named so because the Aztec called themselves the Mexica, Mexico, Mexico City. So again, there's going to be this tie to the Aztec culture even without it. And there's a lot of things that we still have because of the Aztec. The Aztec grew lots of corn. What we think of as like traditional Mexican actually goes back to the Aztec. Even chocolate. Chocolate was really an Aztec thing. And basically the reason we European descendants have this, and I'm talking culturally, not necessarily physically, is because of the sharing of chocolate with Cortez and Montezuma's court, which got sent back to Spain, which brought the whole thing is this giant exchange of culture that's known collectively as the Columbian Exchange. Now, one of the things that the Aztec are most probably infamous for is human sacrifice. Part of their faith involved sacrifice, and particularly of victims captured in the battlefields. Slavery was a major thing in the Aztec culture, and if you understand the Aztec Empire from the standpoint of tribes, most people in it weren't actually Aztec. The vast majority were smaller tribes that had been conquered by the Aztec and had to pay tribute to them, which sometimes included people who were going to be sacrificed on the altars of Tenochtitlan and other places. Now, that being said, we don't actually know how often this occurred. And by the way, it absolutely did happen. It was pretty brutal and gross. I mean, essentially the purpose of human sacrifice was to rip someone's heart out and burn it. Totally, sort of like Temple of Doom stuff going on. Well, the thing of it was, when you actually read Cortez's letters where he's talking about it going down, what he writes doesn't make any sense. For instance, in one of his letters, he writes back, on the grand celebration of the founding of Tenochtitlan, the priests in the city sacrificed 100,000 victims in one night. Now, just think about that for a second. 100,000. If I was going to take 100,000 gummy babies and say you needed to feed 100,000 gummy babies, I doubt you could do it.
Okay.
100,000 is a lot, That's, 100,000 of anything is kind of hard to do. You know? Think about that. 100,000 sit-ups.
I can barely do 10.
Right? I mean, I don't know if I could, in one night, take a television remote and mute the TV 100,000 times. You know? That's some serious dedication. It's if you had it all the time it takes, and by the way, it's not like this is like assembly line, ritual sacrifices. There's the ritual part of it, so it takes time. Odds are good that Cortez was lying through his teeth, that he knew that it wasn't true, that he was spreading falsehood. Why? Well, keep in mind, he's a conquistador. He's writing back to his king what he wants to do. And what he really wants to do is steal all their stuff. He wants to steal all their gold and enrich himself and basically bring back all this stuff in glory. If you guys have seen Pocahontas, this would be the Disney movie. You know the dude who's like the viceroy, I forget what his name is, because I've only ever seen him twice. But the dude, you're like, I'm going to go home to England, I'm going to be draped in gold, and they end up like the rest of them.
Oh, I think I'm not the one like the boy who should call him.
No. Yeah, right. Yeah, whatever that guy's name is. Right, that's that sort of mentality, right? That sort of motivation. Now, here's the thing. He can't just do that, because think about this. Even though they are savages, I must say, if we bust out the Disney song, this is going to get real. I got a story about that. Anyway, hang on. Okay. So here's the deal. Imagine you're Cortez, you're writing back. Dear King of Spain, I found these really cool people with all this stuff. I'm going to murder them all and steal all their stuff. Okay, sound good. Send that back to me to be like, did I send a crazy person? No, you can't do this, you psycho. Instead what he does is he sends back a letter saying, these poor savages, they're being sacrificed into hundreds of thousands by their own people. We have no choice but to step in and save them from themselves. Right? Now here's the thing is, every time a conquistador band walked up to a town, they would read an edict that basically said, we are bringing the light of Christ to you. Anyone who wants to surrender and convert to Christianity right now, in the game, come on right over. No one will come to you, your bros, right? But if you refuse, we will have to convert you by the point of the sword and save your soul. Sound good? Right? So they would have a dude read this in a document to everybody, right? In Spanish. So no. And the thing of it is, there's a lot of times that they're like, well, if we did that, then we give away the elements of Christ. So we'll just assume they said no. But the whole point is so they can go back and say, no, we offered them a chance. They refused. We had to, right? And so they are going on this path of conquest. But again, it's strange. How are they able to do this? Now, what's the first reason you might think of? What's the first advantage that Europeans have that the natives don't? What kind of weapons? What do Europeans have? Europeans. They have guns, right? And they also have steel, right? So we're talking about rock weapons, yeah? You try to hit a rock against that steel breastplate, not going to do anything except break your rock. It might have a strong impact on the dude under it, but probably not, because the dude under it's got padding and stuff like that. So you got to imagine how this would freak out the Aztec. They're like, bash, and the rock weapon just explodes, and the dude's like, man, kaboosh! Right? The other thing, steel swords are superior to rock ones, but let's talk guns for a second, right? These guns are basically firelock muskets, matchlock muskets. What that means is, when you're firing the gun, you actually have a pan you open up and pour loose gunpowder into, and then shut. Then you've got this cord of burning match that you have to blow on so it's nice and hot. And then when you pull the trigger, you're basically pulling a lever that touches the end of the match into the powder so that it ignites the gun. They're very slow, they're not terribly accurate, but oh boy are they loud. If you have enough gunfire going off, you really can't hear very well. I can tell you this from experience. I've been in a few battlefields where there have been a whole mess of muskets and cannons going off, and the first thing you realize is how freaking noisy they are. And second of all, whenever you fire, a fire lock is the term, it shoots out a ball of flame about that long at the end of the barrel. I actually have a really cool photo somewhere, I don't remember where, of somebody shooting their musket, and it looks like a laser coming out of it. It's just this ball of flame. So you have to understand the Aztecs' point of view. They're fighting these dudes, and they have a stick which they point at somebody, and then it explodes, and one of your dudes dies. There's stories writing back that these guys are carrying dragons, you know. You know, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying, and that's one of the main advantages the Europeans have. It's not just the weapons, because to be perfectly honest, that's not a good enough advantage, not when we're talking these big numbers. So, there's another main advantage that contributes to this, and it's disease. Smallpox, malaria, diseases that the Aztec had no natural defense to. You see, we say, how many of you guys have heard that before? They had no defenses to the diseases the Europeans had. Fantastic. If you haven't, this is true. Collectively, we say that they had guns, germs, and steel on their side. Three. Now, what this did, though, is it had a psychological effect as well. Psychological warfare is a major point. Understand this about war, guys. You don't ever lose a war you don't want to lose. Or to put it another way, the only thing that determines if you lose is you. It's when you give up. And so, with these guns, with the steel, with these diseases, the Aztec just like, we can't possibly fight against this, and they surrender. Furthermore, they were divided against each other, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is the Aztec calendar. To kind of put it into a little bit more relief so you can see it a bit easier, this is what it looks like. And this is where people got all excited about how in 2012 the world was going to come to an end.
Why the hell do you see that on there?
Okay, so let's look at it. So basically, here's what people were saying. This is actually, as I said, a calendar. Days, months, years, and so on and so forth. Basically, they saw it as in cycles. And it's almost like a clock. Like you go around and you do the next part and the next part, and it goes all the way around. So according to certain translations, this is when we hit 2012. We got back to here. We got to the end of the cycle. Yes? Now here's the basic misunderstanding of this. What happens when you reach the end of the cycle? Yeah. People kind of fail to remember that fact. You know, that circles really don't have.
Oh, I was so scared.
People.
I wasn't.
All right, so the conquistadors you should know are Hernando Cortez and Francisco Pizarro. Cortez conquers the Aztec, Pizarro conquers the Inca. And there's going to be a major effect of these conquests. You see, the Spanish are going to conquer these areas and then immediately enslave the native populations. These natives are then going to be first to work on farms, in mines, and all sorts of other physical labor tasks under the encomienda system established by the Spanish. This is going to send huge amounts of wealth back into Spain. So much money that their economy is effectively going to become dependent on it. Now, the effects of this later on down the line. The other European powers are going to see all this money coming out, and basically the Spanish would load it all up in big lumbering ships called galleons and sail them across the Atlantic, and they were a big juicy target for the other European navies to go and steal, essentially. But the problem was, the Atlantic is a really big place, and so individual European monarchies couldn't afford to outfit enough ships to actually attack all these Spanish ships. So what they did is they sort of contracted it out. Rich individuals who were kind of filled with a desire for adventure could go buy a ship, hire a crew, load it up with guns and ammunition, all the supplies they need, and go merrily sailing and essentially go pirating. They would go steal all the treasure of their nation's enemies, and they would bring back and essentially give a percentage to the European power of their choosing. So, for instance, if you were an English privateer, which is what this term is, you would be given a letter of the mark, which is a legal document stating that you are technically part of the Navy of England, and so anything you steal from, say, France or Spain is fair game. You're acting in the act of war. However, you were limited on your targets. So let's say that you're an English privateer, and England is currently at war with Spain. You go sailing in the Caribbean. You see a big old French ship going by that's laden down with goods and all this stuff that you would love to steal. You're not legally allowed to do that. You're not allowed to because England's not at war with France at the time. So you just have to let them sail by. Now, the thing is, not a lot of crews had the discipline to do that. Some did. For instance, Sir Francis Drake was pretty great at that, but others not so much. And so what they would do is they would steal all the money on the French ship. The French would be really, really mad, and depending on how successful you are, you could always bribe your way back into the good graces of the King of England. So this did happen. Other instances were problematic because essentially when a war ended, let's say England and Spain make up, we have all these heavily armed warships, essentially, these privateers, who are now out of the job. So a lot of times they said, yeah, that's all great, we're not stopping. And so essentially, the golden age of piracy, this period of time where we've seen more pirate activity than pretty much any other in history, was caused because they set it up themselves. The European powers, this would be like, giving a whole bunch of people military-grade weapons and saying, yeah, we never get to use them. It's preposterous. Another way of looking at it this way is if you've ever known someone who ends up going through martial arts training, so fashion, and that makes them more violent, like they want to get in fights so they can use what they learned, it's that sort of catch-22. You want to train someone so that they're going to use it for the right reasons, but people don't always make the best decisions. So what were the motivations of the conquistadors? Well, the first is pretty obvious. They wanted gold. But the second one is another major part. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed the replicas of Columbus's ship. What's on the sails? A giant red crucifix. This was on a mission from God to spread Christianity. The only way to save their souls is to convert them, forcibly if necessary. So gold and God were the reasons. Now, one thing I'm sure that's less well known is this person's story right here. A woman by the name of Malinche. You see, as you guys pointed out a minute ago, Cortez doesn't actually speak Aztec, does he? No, he speaks Spanish. So how was he able to communicate with the Aztec? The answer is he had a translator, a woman by the name of Malinche. She was a member of a tribe that had been captured and conquered by the Aztec. So she had the philosophy of, well, an enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I'm going to help out this Cortez dude, and hopefully they will enable us to break free. Doesn't quite work that way, but she is an incredibly important lady. She's sort of the Sacagawea of Latin America. So we talked about that. So another major impact, guys, as I was pointing out, the natives were having a major problem with European diseases. And in some cases, whole tribes just vanished, utterly died out because of the diseases. And the natives were being used as slave labor. And as the natives died off, there was less and less slave labor, and so the Europeans needed slaves. They needed slaves in order to harvest sugar, to mine gold, all these types of things. So they started looking for places where they could get free labor. Guess where they turned? Gee, I wonder where. Let's have a look at the geography of the world and let's make sense. So keep in mind that we're talking about an area that is within the tropics. So at first they're like, hey, we'll just get European slaves, right? Because that was a thing. There was a lot of slaves that were whites. But the thing is white slaves didn't do really well in the heat and everything was bad. So like, okay, that's not going to work. What? Right. So instead they're like, what's an area that's got a similar climate, guys? What's an area that's got a similar climate to this area in the world? Africa. You guys know the transatlantic slave trade, the triangle trade?
Yeah.
This is when it starts. It's to bring slaves to Latin America. More slaves ended up in Latin America than in North America. This is where it all begins. Largely it has to do with the sugar trade. But what this is going to have an effect on is the mass migration, forcibly, of an entire category of ethnic groups that leads to the creation of new ethnic groups. This is the Treaty of Tordesillas we talked about, where the Pope got stepped in so that Portugal and Spain wouldn't go to war. But this is what I was actually going to talk to you guys about regarding faith and the spreading of Christianity. And indeed, one of the other things that we don't often think about is from other places. Now, the vast majority, as you can see, of Latin Americans are Catholic, but there's a significant number of indigenous still in certain areas, and then also Islam in certain areas as well. Now, what's happened with this forcible migration of peoples is the creation of cultural traditions which had never existed before. One of these has to do with faith, syncretism, a blending of cultures. Now, most Africans... Yes. No, we're talking about Latin America specifically. One of the things, or most Africans and folks that were natives of the Caribbean were polytheistic. You guys know what that term means, yes? Polytheistic means multiple god religion, as opposed to monotheistic, which is singular.
Actually, can you spell both of those?
Yep. And actually, I'll talk about another one as well. We have mono and polytheism. Theism is a belief in God or gods, the case may be. And mono is singular, poly is multiple. Polytheism, monotheism. Okay? Now there's also animism. And this is a belief in nature spirits, that everything sort of has a spirit that needs to be at peace. So sort of think like Native American religions. They're an example of an animist faith. So a lot of times, these natives were polytheistic animists, same thing with native tribes, but they're being forced to Christianity. That being said, even though you're forcing someone to believe something, doesn't mean you can actually force them to believe it. So what happens is missionaries sort of blended these cultures a little bit to make it easier for conversion, and so new religions were created out of this blending. For instance, Voodoo and Rastafarianism. These are two examples of religions which did not exist before the introduction of all these other cultures. So we see a direct cause and effect movement into this region. Okay. Furthermore, various musical forms were invented in this region, such as calypso, reggae, samba, as well as the fourth one, which is indigenous to Brazil, which is actually a martial art that looks like dancing, called capoeira. Have you guys ever heard of capoeira? It's really neat to watch. You guys are actually going to see it in the video that I'm going to show you guys on Friday. But capoeira was a martial art designed by the natives in order to train warriors where it would not be obvious. It involves a lot of acrobatics and things like that. And so the idea was to hide a martial art in plain sight. Another example of that same philosophy is Tai Chi. You guys know Tai Chi? If you've ever seen someone practicing it, it doesn't look like a martial art. For instance, there's stuff like, it's like, how is this a martial art? Like, here's why that's a martial art, right? So that particular maneuver I just did, what you're actually practicing is if someone punches at you, you turn the wrist aside and then wrist strike them underneath the chin. And then basically you bring this sort of hook shape down and pull their shoulder out of their socket. That's called a single whip. Now, it looks preposterous, but the thing of it is, the wrist is actually the hardest part of your bone, like one of the hardest bones in your arm. And ostensibly what you're trying to do is you're trying to aim the wrist strike underneath their chin right about here. And if you hit them just right, I'm not going to strike. But you can also cause them to pop their jaw together and break their teeth. No. That's one of the things to understand with it. Is, like I said, it looks ridiculous, but it actually is training you to fight. Think about what the term martial means. Martial means war, the art of war, right? So what you're training to do is kill people. But the thing is a lot of times it loses that whole thing. It's sort of like fencing, actually, because the sport of fencing is all about touching somebody with a blade. That's not what the purpose of is in actual fencing. I'll show you guys that stuff what I mean later. Like, for instance, there's a lot of stuff in actual combat manuals in fencing about fighting you with your bare hand. It seems weird because it's the point to fight with a sword, but a lot of times what happens is you get in so close you can't use the sword anymore, so you can pull a dagger, or you start wrestling, essentially. And I remember, one of the things I'll never forget is a maneuver that's described where basically you're fighting somebody and you are stepping in close and wrapping your fingers around their hair, and it prescribes in the manual to find the nearest hard surface where you then smash their face into it and grind their face off. It is, that's the point. The objective is to kill the opponent, not to make them happy and, they understand. Oh, no. It's to kill them as fast as conceivable. Now, there are maneuvers where you can disarm them, and then you basically, now what are you going to do to me? And so that usually will end the fight, but if it doesn't, you end them. That's the point of fencing, Another celebration that's kind of popular and a big deal throughout Latin America and indeed most of the European world, was that? It is, Carnival, yes. Yep. Now, one thing to put this in perspective, it's around the same time as Lent, right? It's a celebration before the beginning of Lent. But, whereas we have Mardi Gras, which is a day before Lent, Carnival lasts a week before Lent. It's a week-long party as opposed to one day. So, we're not really used to that in our culture. Let's talk weddings for a second. Guys, Weddings, for instance, nowadays we think about it as being like an afternoon or something like that. Weddings in many cultures before were like 3-4 days. It's the kind of party where you keep going. There's stories of like people passing out at like their dinner tables, waking up and like, party again, and they just continue. It's a thing. Alright, that's it, guys. For the day. Todos los días. Make what? No?
Please, no.
No. I say, you can look it up and